This session on how do councils support, finance or directly deliver affordable housing. So we talked a bit about levies and direct provision, working with community housing providers, councils owning housing themselves, leasing. There's lots of different amazing models out there. The purpose of this session, we've got Laurie from Bridge Housing, one of the leading community housing providers that partners with councils to talk about things from sort of the CHP perspective, which I think will be really useful. We've got Professor Lawrence Troy, who is a fantastic lecturer in urbanism and is going to show you some very exciting graphs, which you will all appreciate. And we've got Councillor Leigh Adamczyk, I hope I said that right, from Newcastle Council, is also on the board of Shelter New South Wales. And we have our fantastic Mayor Zoe Baker, North Sydney Council, one of the longest running affordable housing schemes in the country, who's going to talk to us about some of the real practical things, not just to get these projects up, but if you've had these projects running for a while and you've housed people, what are some of those lessons that you can share with other councillors? So our first, same format as before, 5 or 6 minutes for the speakers, and then we'll get a good amount of time for a panel discussion for all of your questions. So our first speaker, who I'd like to invite, is Associate Professor Lawrence Troy. As I mentioned, he's a professor in urbanism at the University of Sydney, specialises in urban renewal, housing economics and governance, and his social housing funding models. Please welcome Lawrence.
Thank you, Sylvie, and thanks Gresha and Nicole for inviting me along and putting on this great event. So I'd like to give my acknowledgement to the Gadigal people whose land we meet on today before I kick on. So what I'm going to talk through today quickly is not so much council or local government examples, but the feasibility challenges around developing social and affordable housing projects. So this comes out of a series of research projects, which I think actually Ryan talked a little bit about before with some of the genesis of this. So to start with, I'm just going to go through the basic formula of putting together projects. Now, for some people, this might be very familiar. For others, maybe less so. So I apologise if you already know a lot about this. But just as a start point, this is modelled out across Australia based on real needs that we've identified across the country. So these are very much averages, and I'll get to some of the differences shortly at the end, but on average it would take about just under $500,000 per unit to develop a social and affordable housing unit. Now, if you're going to debt fund that project, as a lot of them are, there's going to be an interest payment. Now, this is not rocket science. We all probably, well, some of us have mortgages or are fortunate enough to have a mortgage. You've got to pay interest on that money over a period of time. Now, we're running a rental housing situation, there are operating costs, insurances and so on, and so that adds together into your pile of costs over the life of a project. So this is modelled out over 25 years, and I will talk about that in a moment. Now, if we take the profile of tenants we can house, or we would like to house from a social housing need point of view, we're talking very low incomes, and we don't want to charge them more than 30%. You end up only being able to extract about that amount of revenue over that time period, and you might pick up some CRA payments. Now, the really important thing here is to show that actually the amount of revenue that you can get out of this is less than the development costs of the project. So before we've even talked about how you might fund projects, how you might finance them, there's this immediate hurdle. And a key message here is it requires government support just from the get-go. Now, how you provide that support is going to have some bearing on the total cost stack on the left. So what it costs to government, what it costs to the public to help and support that. And so there are important decisions that we can make here. So there is this gap. Now, this is modelled on a gap where it is finance paid for up front. So there is that kind of interest cost you see over 25 years. Now, to express this on just an annual basis, because it's a little bit more digestible, it's like saying we'd need to cover about $25,000 in addition, or just as a government support. And this is really what the HAF model is built on. We'll cover up to, say $25,000 per year for 25 years, and that will make it all work out with all those costs on the other side. Now, there's a few assumptions there, which I won't go into. But when we start to think about some policy choices around this, that was an interest or a finance-driven funded project. What are the impacts of time in terms of how long you might have that finance? And this is about speaking to a kind of conversation around HAF and the length of time that availability payments might be there. So on the left, if you have an availability payment that's available for 1 year only, it's like saying you paying a capital grant to build the whole project. Now you can spread that out over a number of years, could be 5 years, 10 years. I mean, these are policy choices. The key message is here, as you spread those payments out over a longer period of time, you inevitably have to hold some kind of debt to make that work in the beginning. So the longer you do that, the higher the costs. We all know that. The longer you hold a debt pile, the more you pay in interest. And the difference over 25 years is about a 53% difference in cost to government to underpin that project. Now there's a tension here. We could spread it out over a long period and spend and deliver some more dwellings now versus perhaps getting less dwellings now but at cheaper cost to government. So if you've got a limited amount to spend and we're cutting it up into smaller parts, then that is the kind of policy conversation that we might want to have. So there is a trade-off. Now, impacts of different kind of finance and investment arrangements. Housing Australia and the old NIFIC bond aggregator facility was about offering cheap sources of finance. There's been many conversations about bringing in super fund equity. Now they're going to be at the other end of the scheme. The returns expected are higher. Private debt expects a higher return than NIFIC finance. So there's a kind of policy choice here. Obviously, you increase the amount of return expected in that financing, you're going to increase the cost to subsidise those projects. Rent setting. If we could charge more rent, perhaps just go beyond the 30% or introduce a greater proportion of households that can pay more. Yes, it has an impact on the amount of subsidy required, but obviously there's a policy trade-off here. But interestingly, down this end where it's full market rent, you're still having problems, which is kind of underlines the problems in the build-to-rent sector generally at the minute. And then there's the for-profit delivery model. So that was all based off community housing driven, where you're getting tax concessions and so on, and there are no profit margins, or at least the profit margins are internalised. So there are other disbenefits of privatising that delivery model. And lastly, which goes to some of the different challenges across the country and across different council areas, the required amount of subsidy is different in different places. And a big part of this is actually just the underlying land values and the economics of land. So at the far right here, this is central Sydney. I can't remember what the far left is, but the grey ones are indicating kind of regional council areas. So it's not a complete like regional metropolitan competition here. There is some variation, but it just underlines the difference in challenge in different parts of the state or Australia. And that's it.
Hello. Now that's really useful because I think one of the things when you get to do more of this work, councils have to, there's a kind of standard cost and return stack that is used both for social housing and for government housing and for private industry, which is sort of when you have these conversations about feasibility. But it also lets us think about, for us as local councils, if we are not doing the development ourselves because we're getting the developer contributions and we're asking for the buildings, then that cost may not exist for you. If we're waiting till we get enough cash saved up before we say go buy an existing housing, then we don't have the interest cost either. And council does, because you get to set in your own affordable housing policy who your affordable housing will be for. You also get to make a lot of choices about what that level of rent might look like, depending on what your community needs and what's, you know, what is a reasonable amount of rent without putting someone in housing stress for what your community needs. And also, most councils are getting a community housing provider to manage the housing, even if they own the asset. And those community housing providers can access some of those subsidies that we as council don't. So there's some bits in there when you analyse how there might be some opportunities for us as local council which make delivering that affordable housing more feasible than it might be even for other organisations, which is very exciting. Okay, so now we have Mayor Zoe Baker. Zoe has represented the Wollstonecraft ward since 2008. She's an independent leader, passionate about urban design, sustainability and community-focused planning. Thank you, Zoe.
Thank you. I acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I'm grateful for their continuing custodianship of these lands, and extend that respect to any First Nations people here today. Hopefully I've got this right. So, North Sydney has been at this for quite a long time. For over 40 years, Council has provided community housing for generations of vulnerable residents. And as a quick snapshot, North Sydney is, I think, all three of the top three most dense local government areas are in the room: City of Sydney, Waverley and North Sydney. We are 10.5 square kilometres, 50% of our residents rent, and 90% of our housing stock is medium and high density. In 1984, Council started an affordable housing program, really I think partly in response to the then old SEP 10, which was about retention of affordable housing, and that was that there were levies for the loss of affordable housing. In 1995, Council formalised SEP 10's outcomes through the adoption of the North Sydney Section 94 plan Affordable Housing. And that required a monetary contribution for the loss of all affordable dwellings and bed spaces identified under SEP 10. In 2003, the former council adopted a new contributions plan, and that just continued the 1995 plan and model of taking contributions for the loss of affordable housing. In 2009, the SEP Affordable Rental Housing came online. And whilst monetary contributions were still levied, the biggest change was that they went to the state government and not to councils, and they didn't have to be spent in the local government area from which they were collected. So since then, from 2015, hopefully I'm getting this, maybe not. From 2015 onwards, all of Council's major strategic planning documents have included affordable housing provision, and so what have we been? I'm having problems with this. I'm doing it on the middle one. Here we are. Here we go. Point it at the screen. Okay, next one. So what have we been doing for 40 years? Council now owns or part owns 142 dwellings. But in that time, we've lost over 2,400 boarding house beds, and that continues to grow, the loss of affordable housing. Most of Council's affordable housing stock has been acquired by buying sites, using those SEP 10 levies, the Section 94 contributions, and through latterly negotiating provisions of units or monetary contributions through voluntary planning agreements. Throughout the 40 plus years, Council has had a strong and enduring partnership with Link Wentworth Community Housing. They began as Community Housing Lower North Shore, and as Andrew McAnulty, the CEO of Link Wentworth, tells it, in literally a broom closet in North Sydney Council chambers. They began by being the managers of all of Council's affordable housing stock, but that partnership has evolved to being one in which we are delivering new buildings together. The lesson from North Sydney is that strong partnerships with community housing providers are absolutely vital to manage and deliver new affordable housing. Equally important is to understand that this takes time, and it's a long-term investment. Delivery of a single project can take between 5 and 10 or more years. And I think it's really essential that you have to have a champion at the elected level. If you don't, at North Sydney, the enthusiasm has waxed and waned over those 40 plus years. and the policies remain in place, but the appetite at the elected level has to be there to support council officers to commit the resources and deliver. The next slide, if I'll try. So the loss of Sep 10 in 2009 was pretty devastating to North Sydney Council, because a flow of those levies just went to the state government. Since then, various state government-led metropolitan and regional plans have recognised the need for affordable housing, but they failed to deliver or mandate any significant response to uplifts in zoning. We particularly noticed this during our priority precinct in St Leonard's and Crow's Nest between 2017 and 2019, where the draft plan had mandatory affordable housing provision, but the plan for the precinct as finally made did not. Such a missed opportunity to mandate a percentage of affordable housing in return for significant uplift in yield on private sites within that precinct. The Crow's Nest accelerated. I'm going to have to go really quickly. I'll leave what's happening in the TODs, because I think that's both a challenge and a big opportunity, and maybe you can ask some questions about that. But more excitingly, if someone can get to the slide, in the last 12 months, in December of last year, we delivered a project that was part of the first round of the HAF. We delivered it in partnership with Wentworth Community Housing. The model for that was that council was a tenant in common with Link Wentworth in ownership of what was a five-room boarding house for elderly men at the end of its life. It is now a 12-unit development, and council specification was that it had to prioritise women over 50 at risk of homelessness and women leaving domestic and family violence. The funding model was pretty complex. Council ended up taking a lesser ownership role in the end, because we just didn't have the contributions to ensure 50%, but we were determined that it would happen, and so in the end council contributed 3.4 million in contributions. The rest was a combination of a very small grant from the state government and the HAF. So what I would just say about that is it took 6 years from when council in 2019 resolved to do the redevelopment until final delivery, and it is complex and it requires internal resources beyond just the contributions. I think there are some real opportunities. I don't want to be negative about this. I think there are some opportunities, particularly in the state significant development pathways, in that we've recently had an application that is almost at its end stage with the department, and the department are offering the developer either in kind for their affordable housing contributions, or a monetary contribution that they say is going to come to council and not the state government. And if that is something that is replicated across other state significant development applications, I think there will be a renewal of the bucket of money that was lost with Sep 10, and that you need to have the plans ready to be able to act on it. And you need to ensure that you have the capacity within the organisation to administer it. So thank you.
Thank you, Zoe, and thank you for persevering through our technical issues. Now I'd like to invite Councillor Liz Adamczyk. I'm sorry, it's the Czech and the Dutch last names that are ruining it. Saying with confidence, to the lectern. Now, I've seen Liz's presentation and it's beautiful, and because the clicker's not working, I'm going to ask her to assertively use her left hand to gesture to clicking support over here. We may have another one that is working. So as I mentioned before, Liz is a councillor with City of Newcastle, but she is also a planning lecturer. So she's wearing two hats to help us today, two very useful hats to talk about some of the interesting stuff that Newcastle Council has been doing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sylvia and Greta, for organising, and everyone that's been involved as well. Really necessary conversations. All right. I'm here from City of Newcastle, acknowledge that we are on traditional unceded lands. These were stolen. When we're talking about housing, we need to acknowledge this. And really important, this is in Newcastle on Gadigal today, but Awabakal and Warramai in Newcastle. I am passionate about justice and fairness. I guess this is my role in that liminal quasi-space as a pracademic, if we're thinking that language that's being used today. A couple of caveats as well, that I will talk about public housing, not social. I hate the language of social housing, a very active project by the state government to confuse and slippery language around there, but also affordability of housing, not just affordable housing. Sylvia and I had that conversation, that these are all necessary and conversations that happen in tandem. I became a councillor in 2022. Some of this work preceded me, but not by very much. We started in about 2020, so local housing strategy adopted in 2020, 15% aspirational target, noting that what we will see through the presentation is not meeting that 15% aspiration, but is steps to get there. We had a project at the bottom, 16 affordable housing units opened in 2021 as a partnership between City of Newcastle, remnants of the Building Better Cities funding that came from the federal government, and Home in Place as well. So really successful, also showing that you can deliver public housing that is also environmentally sustainable and great to live in. Under this, we also identified that we'll be pursuing the Affordable Housing Contribution Scheme. One of those councils back in 2017, 2018, where you still had to prove that you had need for a housing contribution scheme. So we did decide to do that. We have a housing policy as well. Then we did this. We had some community organisations come to us declaring that this is a humanitarian crisis as well. We know that we have women, families fleeing domestic violence, family violence, that need housing and are not able to live in there. At the time, average rent, I've put these figures up there because we probably look back and laugh at that now, $400. That was unsustainable. It's now nearly double that. I think it's 75% increase to the last available figures for rent. We have projected housing need to 2036 identified as 1,100 just for public housing. Affordable housing is more than 10 times that beyond there. This is our Affordable Housing Contribution Scheme, just gazetted last year, which is fantastic, but many years in development. We have general contribution across the city. We have site-specific for planning proposals that can be negotiated. Rate varies by location. So for me, as a councillor, I needed to know that we were disaggregating and thinking about suburbs and the differential land values, and making sure we have some high density, a lot of very high value coastal suburbs, some bushland left barely, lots of single level suburban ring suburbs, and outer, in my ward, very low social economic need areas as well. So it was actually methodologically commended by the state government for the work that our planners did. We now have our Housing Affordability and Livability Working Party oversight. We previously were Affordable Housing Working Party, but having this oversight where we bring together cross-sector, industry, government, community partners to workshop everything that comes to us gives a really rigorous, really strong baseline for our work. We have also identified 14 more sites across the city, including this one coming up, Rail Bridge Row, which was, I won't dwell on this, we can talk about it later if you want, but just to the point that was made about the importance of elected champions. Our CEO wanted to potentially sell this site because it's very high value and distribute the money elsewhere rather than making sure everyone has the right to the city and the right to live where they want to live. Council kiboshed it. We have this is the Accelerated Development Assessment Scheme. So to the point that there is the push to produce ever more quickly, more numbers, the state government rhetoric that it's all numbers, it's all about getting those out there. That was adopted in 2023 to give a bit of certainty and speed to developers if they go through these steps of how long it will take. Is award-winning. State government loves it. They're wanting to roll it out across the state to other councils. And of course it is, right? Because targets are king to the state government. We had 11,000 to deliver by 2041 homes additionally in the city because we were ahead of our targets, due in no small part to things like this, where our staff have internalised that logic of delivery. Paul Scully rang us during one council meeting and said, we've pulled that 2041 target forward to 2029. So in 5 years, we're not going to meet those targets now. Planning is not the issue, right? We are approving ahead of the targets, but it is the rest of that process where they're not getting built. So important to note that. I've put this up here. This is where we found our opportunities. So council has constraints, right? Local governments have constraints. We have budgets, we have limited rates in income, and we had in our city an adopted capital works program of $100 million. What we knew was that we were foregoing rates on all of the properties that were owned by the state. And so we actually went to them, looked for a bipartisan solution to be a bit more creative, to find out where we could mobilise what we knew, our resources to deliver value sharing and value capture for public benefit. There are 4,500 almost public homes across the city, so that's nearly $2 million in rates foregone. Across the 3-year period, we established an MOU with the state government under Melinda Pavey, former Liberal government, when the state government was not actually building any public housing, to provide those rates foregone back to the city of Newcastle. We've matched that with our own contribution to a value of $12 million in the city. Proposals put forward at the time, state government was all about raise, rebuild, on that 70-30 model. We had to decide what we were looking at. To me, as an academic, absolutely not with that 70-30 loss of pure public housing back in. So what we did decide to do was to focus on these single dwellings in the city and make sure that we were getting density uplift there. This was a really historic memorandum of understanding for a couple of reasons at the time. First is that local government doesn't really deliver public housing. But we can't be bypassing. And the local government was giving the state money to do their job. So we've worked closely with them now. We've actually seen the first set of homes delivered. That was a couple of years ago, standing at the site. This is the housing that was just delivered just last year, and tenants have come in. This is the state government and the federal government taking over the very good news story that local government had delivered here, thanks to the Lord Mayor's negotiating tactics and skills. But delivering on the ground, really important. This is what's to come, another 20 homes to be delivered under this agreement within the next year, and we've renegotiated and resolved to actually continue with this work. We also think it provides a replicable model under that section 555, 556 of the Local Government Act, that all local governments, no matter where you are in the state, could also be doing this. We've asked Kirsten Fishburn to do that, and so that's where I'll finish up. It's about knowing your legislation, knowing your area, and finding those opportunities.
That's wonderful. Oh, what's with the mics today? Can you hear me? There we go. Hey, thank you, Liz. That's fantastic. Now we have one more speaker before we invite our speakers back for a panel discussion. I'm very excited to introduce Laurie, Leigh, who is the new CEO of Bridge Housing, one of the Tier 1 leading community housing providers who I know has partnerships or has delivered housing with a number of the councils that are in the room, including the City of Sydney, to come and talk to us about funding for public and social housing. Welcome, Laurie.
Thank you. And I would also like to acknowledge that we are on Gadigal lands and pay my respects to elders past and present. So I thought I would give you guys a very practical, this is, what is possible, and a little bit of a sense of what the opportunities are right now for some joint work that will deliver on social and affordable housing. But first, to set the scene a little bit, Bridge is a Tier 1 community housing provider. I have put our constitution up there because that absolutely guides what we and most other community housing providers can do. We are charities, we're not-for-profits. We can't be going off making money from developing houses or doing anything like that if it's not there to provide for affordable housing for people with low rents. So I know there's sometimes a little bit of, these are all private organisations. We have a very strict charter that we have to stand behind. So there's an example there. Just a little bit of a sense of the community housing sector. So Bridge has got about 6,000 tenants. We have just under 4,000 homes across Sydney, largely in the northern beaches, eastern suburbs, inner west, and a growing portfolio in western Sydney, because really, honestly, at the moment, that's one of the few places you can actually build new houses. Charitably build new houses rather than making enormous profits and selling it off. Across New South Wales, there's about 230 community housing providers. We manage about 45,000 homes. And there's enormous diversity. So about 40 providers are specifically Aboriginal community housing providers. We have housing providers here in Sydney who are very small, who manage 200, 300, 400 housing homes, through to providers much larger than Bridge Housing. So there are community housing providers across the whole of New South Wales, and if you're looking for a partner, there will be one, at least one in your local area. So I'm going to run you through probably 3 separate projects, very different models underneath each of them, but it gives you a sense, I think, of the flexibility that you can have with partnerships with community housing providers. So this is one that provider, I will say this was before my time as the fairly new CEO of Bridge, but these are partnerships that have been there in the past and that exist and have been the sort of long-term partnerships we heard before. This is one where this is a fee-for-service model, so the units were owned by Canada Bay Council. They'd been given up as a salt and pepper in-kind contributions in strata developments over years. So although it looks like they're in one nice home there with the pretty picture, they're not. They're spread all over Canada Bay. And the real focus was on, for the council, was on key workers for Concord Hospital. So with the fee-for-service model, Bridge was basically the tenancy manager for a tenancy and asset manager for the council. We provided that service for a fee to the council. The rents went back to the council. The capital costs came out from the council. So, you know, that's a very light touch from a CHP perspective, a very light touch model. And there's a lot of our properties that we do provide that sort of model for, whether it's for council, the state government, private developers in some cases, and probably of all the different types of partnerships, one of the easier ones to set up. Sorry, just back on that one. And the reason why you might do that as a council is because you don't want to be managing tenancies if that's not core business. This is another example of a very different type of model. So in this one, this was a partnership with Waverley Council. It was a partnership where we both put in and joint purchased this particular building. It was focused really on older people and really looking at, although it wasn't classified as a social housing, it was looking at rents that were at the very, very low end of the affordable housing rent in order to make sure that people on the aged care pension could afford it. And so we jointly purchased and refurbished this block here in Bondi, and there were equal co-contributions, both of equity from the council and from Bridge, and ongoing maintenance contributions. And Bridge managed the tenancies and the maintenance services in that one. Finally, one that's, again, completely different model for partnerships. And so this is one in Glebe. This is with the City of Sydney. We purchased an older style apartment block and refurbished it. It's got 20 units in there. The focus for this one was really around Aboriginal women. And we've got a great little community going there at the moment. The financial model that sat beneath this one was really, I think, one that I'll talk about in a little bit more detail in a minute, but it's one where the community housing provider was an aggregator of different types of funds to get something to come together to actually work. So we had a donation from the City of Sydney, thank you very much. We also managed to apply for a $5 million Homes New South Wales grant. And then Bridge took out some debt and put a little bit of funding towards it as well. So now we have a 20 unit block, which is the rents, the very low rents. And thank you very much to my learned colleague earlier that put the capital stacks up there, because I live and breathe that one. And I'm getting the move on, so I should be quick. So these are some of the different models. Fee for service, as I've gone through, longer term leasehold where the CHP receives all of the rents as well as paying for the maintenance. Looking at how we can make grants stack up with a capital, in a capital stack as we saw before, to make sure that the long term costs are affordable. And I did want to finish on this one, which is a little bit about what the opportunities are now. So CHPs are great scroungers. If there's a little bit of funding here and a little bit of a grant there and something else here, and can we make this stack up, we're really good at putting things together and making a project out of little bits of money here and there. It's really important to have a genuine partnership when we do that, that is long term, that's based on solid values alignment. And in terms of what some of the opportunities are right now, there is a closing window on HAF3. That's the last of the currently federal funding. There is a closing window in that There were a number of streams, apart from the Aboriginal community housing stream, which is still open. For the standard housing, Stream 2 and Stream 4, those were oversubscribed within 48 hours of it opening. There is one stream left, which is the state-based stream, and the state came out at the beginning of this week with an EOI for community housing providers to say, put something in before the 14th of April and for half round 3. So this would be a model where, for example, a council could put in some land, the homes would put in some money, we'd apply for some federal money, and we could make it stack up.